it's certainly been a constant. The idea of creativity has been a subject of research and experimentation over a 3-decade period. I've got 3 successive academic degrees culminating in a doctorate looking at visual thinking, visual expression, looking at how creative process manifests in tangible ways. For example, stone carvers, a community of stone carvers, which I studied in Kenya, how do they actually literally create knowledge and the practice that allows them to be creative? So a meta theme, if you will, and then I have a background in studio going back to pre-university, and probably about 30 years of experience in a variety of media. So I understand the firsthand, tangible experience of getting an idea, working with accident, being lateral, being attuned to connecting dots, that kind of thing. So I have both an academic and an experiential foundation of understanding creativity. And then from a professional point of view, I haven't been an academic. I didn't make a living as an educator. So I've worked in the market. I spent over 15 years in the jewelry industry as a senior executive, and ultimately ended up training MBAs how to become more creative, which is key in a luxury industry like jewelry, where visual design and color and psychology are so important. And without the creative process, you don't have an industry. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. One starts with imagination as a primal capacity that humans have, and it's a distinctly human capacity. And in that capacity of being able to, in one's mind's eye, if you will, envision what isn't, what doesn't exist, what if, why not, that has been a propelling impetus throughout the millennia. So if one starts with imagination, then the question becomes, what the heck is this faculty? And one wants to understand how our understanding of it from a meta point of view has evolved. And so I've spent time researching the history of how different periods have understood this faculty. To use a poor analogy, let's say in the Arab world and in the East, there was always a knowledge that the world was round, but there was a time in Europe where people really believed it was flat. And so if you watch through the march of time, this faculty for being able to envision what doesn't exist is a primal force, especially if we as humans have the ability to manifest what we imagine. Blake said, what is now proved was once imagined. So in that vein, one can understand evil genius. One can understand all the terrible systematic horrors of this world were envisioned. You know, I've studied entrepreneurship, and it's very interesting to see, take a leaf from Star Wars of the good side of the Force and the dark side of the Force. If you want to talk about gangs, I mean, if you want to talk about criminal organized crime, they're as entrepreneurial as any Fortune 500 company, except it's all to an evil end. What is an evil end? An evil end is when you cause suffering. An evil end is when you self-aggrandize at the expense of other people. It's when you know, the Lakota here in North America had an expression for the Europeans who were coming in as colonists. The whites, they called them Wasichu, but what it really meant in Lakota was the greedy eaters of the fat, because they would kill the buffalo and the colonists would only, the invaders would only eat the hump and they'd leave everything else, whereas the people on the plains made use of every single part and it was a sacred thing. So that evil is that, the greedy eaters of the fat who were never satisfied. And I bring it down not so much to imagination, but to ethics. And in my worldview, there are basically two kinds of people. There are people who will give you their last $5 if you're in need, and there are people who will kill you for your last $5. As basic as that. So when you have genius, one can't deny the genius, the evil genius of people who can murder 10 million people. There's something terribly, profoundly mechanistic about the ability to do that requires engineering. It requires, they listened to Beethoven while they were killing people. So imagination, this is why the Greeks and the Hebrews were suspect. They were concerned that it's a raw power, and therefore in the hands of the unlettered and the ignorant, it can be greatly misused. So that's the whole ball of wax as to what this is. It's really it's an amazing thing to me, just final thought about this history and the bias in the West because of that. So we've enfranchised reason, left imagination outside the classroom. We know how to grade for calculus, but we don't know how to grade for character, and we don't know how to grade for creative. Well, there are tests to grade creativity, but it isn't a systemic thing the way numeracy and literacy are given as a baseline for education. Imaginal education should kind of be the third leg of the stool. And imagination can't be applied without moral centers. So it's not an abstract, it's not about creating pictures in an art room. It's about understanding why Einstein, who's revered, I guess, as one of the greatest minds of all time, would say it's more important than knowledge. But in our daily work as professionals, and certainly in schools, imagination is given short shrift because we take it for granted. It's a fish in water, and it is so omnipresent. And if you were to just stop and look at any item in the physical world, before it was anything, it was somebody's idea. And innovation and invention is always about what if we could make this better, or what happens if there's an issue or a problem and there is no solution. Where is that? It's going to come from lateral thinking, and then you have a whole industry that's evolved over the last 50 years, 6 hats and all this neat stuff, to help people re-engage with this thing that has been left outside of their normative educational experience. It's left to chance. But now, in the 21st century, now industry is saying, well, government is saying, the only way we can succeed is if we are innovative, if we out-innovate. We have to be creative. We need inventive, innovative, creative workforces that have been trained to be, regimented and fearful and habituated and lacking confidence in their own imagination. So there's this big gap between what industry and government want from its citizenry and employees and what the current system is. And here's the rub, coming back to the genie in the bottle, if you will, is imagination is not something that can be controlled. It can't be put in a box. It can't be saying it's 9 a.m., even though there are people who say that you can kind of mechanize or automate the imagination process, and there's certainly all this AI saying machines can do it, but All right, that was my rant.
So, yes, so Howard, imagination, a lot of people, well, I suppose everyone acknowledges that creativity needs to be preceded by imagination. First of all, we need to imagine something, have an idea. And imagination distinguishes great leaders, and great leaders can be, you know, it depends on the context. If we exalt them as being great leaders, you know, for some people, Hitler is a great leader. For some people, Genghis Khan is an example of a great leader. And for others, they are examples of leaders who used their imagination in what you and I would acknowledge to be non-ethical ways, because they caused a lot of
Even
suffering.
evil.
Yes, or you know, some people would evil, kind of evil or wrong or harmful. You know, those are, some people associate evil with religion, whereas like maybe a more secular word for it is destructive, perhaps.
Well, I would say, if we want to parse, I would say yes, evil is associated with a worldview that ascribes morality. But I would, I work with virtual teams. I'm looking for ways always, especially global teams today are intercultural, cross-cultural, very different cultures, very different operational functions, different age groups, different worldviews thrown together to solve a problem. And this is something I grapple with in my professional work. And there's all this cultural knowledge about how the Germans are compared to the Thais, compared to the Italians, compared to the Brazilians. There are certain kind of gestalts around different cultures and different ways to do things that are accepted and norms that might be strange to uh, a non-homogeneous part of the society. Anyways, the point being, I I'm always looking for a kind of axis where they're on the horizontal plane, they're just gradients of difference about how people think about and approach things. And those are going to be very different in some cases. But I'm always looking at the vertical axis, and the vertical axis are universal values. And the best I've been able to come up with in all these years is the golden rule. It seems that the golden rule exists in practically every society. What's the golden rule? The variant is do unto others as you would have others do unto you, or don't do to other people what you don't want them to do. Whatever it is, it's a notion of reciprocity. It's a notion of mutuality. It's a notion of symbiosis and synergy rather than conflict and competition. And from my research, this is now, um, prehistoric psychology and sociology and various research trends that are out there. Um, we're social animals in our DNA and in the DNA of social animal groups like wolves and monkeys and bumblebees that tend to work. There is actually, even though Darwin talked about claw and tooth, if you want to talk about nature and you talk about empirical science and secular terms for religious ideas, but the idea basically is we've got a certain imprint about what a natural morality is about. And therefore, I have to say, at this point of the history that we're in, um, I I keep religion out of my discourse. Um, I think religion, particularly if you just want to look at what's going on in any faith body today, um, I don't think any faith body has anything particularly to hold up as a paragon of virtue. And I mean every faith body. When you have Buddhists killing Muslims and Christians killing Christians and Muslims killing Muslims and Jews killing Muslims and Muslims killing Jews and Hindus killing Muslims and Muslims killing Hindus, then there's something wrong, basically. So I would say when you have leaders who understand history and understand human nature and have acquired the power that they do, and then they start subverting the rule of law, subverting the common good, the common weal, which we have a natural understanding of that natural law, then it's evil. And I'm not going to apologize or try to find an alternative word, okay? Because there are people who are so cynical and so self-serving and so self-aggrandizing and so consumed with this notion of me, that they're killing everything around them. So I apologize, but I feel very strongly about it, particularly today.
Okay, I understand. And Howard, imagination is closely associated with leadership, as we just said earlier. And we could say that the most powerful leaders are the ones who had the greatest visions, you know, the most powerful, clear visions that they were then able to act upon. Whereas those who are lesser leaders, they, you know, perhaps their sense of imagination is not so clear cut, you know, or maybe they're not acting on their imagination, or they're not utilizing their imagination. What are your thoughts on that? About
well, then I
imagination?
think, thank you. I mean, and by the way, I mean, I really thank you for this opportunity, and this, I love what you're doing, and your questions are very lucid and penetrating, and they're forcing me to think. And obviously, you're getting a bit of an emotional reaction. Just because of current events. I'm just very concerned about the state of the world right now. And I would say to you, if you understand anything about history, the 1930s were a very, very dark time for the rule of law and for democracy, liberal democracy. Um, Fascism was on the rise. You know, Guernica, which talk about creative process and art and imagination and activism and political courage, Picasso was supposed to be, they were painting that for, he was going to do something for the World's Fair that was in Paris. And in that time that he was doing, that's when the Civil War started, and suddenly there was a Republican and a fascist, and the Germans, who were allied with Franco, used their Luftwaffe, their air force. It was the very first time that they practiced civilian air bombardment. So Guernica became this tremendous expression of that evil, when the genius of engineers and scientists and the best minds of some society decide that what they're going to do is rain terror on innocent children. You know, I don't get it. So leadership is a funny word. And there's a scene in, again, the movie Spartacus with Kirk Douglas, fascinating, because the scriptwriter had been blacklisted for a long time in Hollywood, having been accused of being a communist, you know, Dalton Trumbo. And Kirk Douglas bucked the system. I think McCarthy was on his way out. Talk about fascism and witch hunts and evil, cynical evil. That there's a scene at the end when the rebels, the slaves, have been defeated, and what's his name, Laurence Olivier says, "Who is Spartacus?" And everybody kind of says, "I am Spartacus." So one of the things that I've been seeing is a democratization of knowledge, thanks to the internet, as long as it remains free. Even though there are tremendous fascist forces at work. And when I say fascist, I mean far right, far left, far north, far south, doesn't matter. If it isn't about kindness, if it isn't about the golden rule, if it isn't about let's all be together and reason together, then it's wrong. And so my point being that in this evolving nature of work, for example, project-based teams that are cross-functional, cross-cultural, cross-generational, if you have a leader, yes, okay, you've got 10 people and they're following the leader, and the leader says, this is what we've got to do and this is how we're going to do it. Maybe the leader's more of a coach and a facilitator than a dictator. But I'm really looking to the day when those 10 people practice essentially distributed leadership, and everybody takes ownership of the situation, so that you don't depend on some one human being. Because in this day and age where we live on a ball, and we know we live on a ball, and the ball keeps turning and karma keeps going round, we're going to get to a point, a tipping point, where we understand that the leaders are just a reflection of the people. And if the people go to sleep, they deserve the nightmares they get. So the people have to wake up. People have to wake up to their own imaginal power, to the morality of that imaginal power. They have to become self-actualized, whatever, wherever you are, whatever you do, wherever you start. Otherwise, we're just going to have more of the same and worse.
I resonate with you, and I think what you're saying is so important, because we need to reflect on the fact that creativity occurs in a context, and a lot of people would try to deny the fact that it occurs in a political context. So I appreciate the fact that you've highlighted the importance of politics. So because my particular research, my focus is on who gets recognized and who doesn't get recognized, and that's a very political question. So yes, I resonate with what you're saying, and this is just a starting point for a discussion, and hopefully through the conference we'll be able to continue this conversation.
Well, again, I applaud what you're doing, and I want to wish success. It seems that you've attracted a critical mass of people who are concerned about these issues, and that it isn't a narrow academic kind of thing you do in the art room. It's not off. It isn't. It is off in left field.
My aim is to build bridges. So
and you seem to be doing that.
Yeah, I'm building bridges between academia,
Right.
entrepreneurship, education. So
right. So I applaud you for that, and I appreciate this opportunity. In a nutshell, it's interesting. It's 2018, and in 2000, I actually started researching this notion of social imagination quite seriously. And for about 3 years, I was working on a book and about this notion: what happens when you have 500 million people watch a Harry Potter movie? What does that do to the social imagination? How does that relate? I consider the internet a canvas upon which the world's imagination is being expressed creatively, for better and for worse. So all of that is of mine today, but my work took me quite a ways away from that book in developing this platform for virtual teams. And it's only lately, 18 years later, where that work about imagination is now coming back into play. And so your conference gave me an opportunity to really focus my thinking and revisit the work I did 18 years ago. So I'm very thankful to you and for the creative work you're doing.